hand resting on her hip, platinum blonde hair pulled back in a sleek chignon that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. Her red lipstick was applied with precision diamond earrings catching the overhead lights as she tilted her head with predatory grace. The fitted Atlantic Airways uniform hugged her curves in all the right places, the gold captain's stripes on her shoulders gleaming like trophies. She was stunning. She was powerful. And she was looking at the man in seat 2A like he was something she'd scrape off the bottom of her designer heels. Marcus Johnson, 48 years old and currently the most powerful man in American aviation, sat perfectly still. He wore a charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, and worn sneakers that had seen better days. His reading glasses were perched on his nose as he looked up from his tablet, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp with intelligence. To anyone watching, he looked like any other tired traveler trying to get home after a long week. What they couldn't see was the Federal Aviation Administration Director's badge tucked inside his wallet. What they didn't know was that the quiet man in the hoodie held the power to ground every aircraft in America with a single phone call. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere because of how you look? If this moment hits close to home, hit that subscribe button, and let's make sure stories like this reach the people who need to hear them most. The cabin of Flight 447 had been tense all evening. Chicago O'Hare was experiencing severe thunderstorms, delaying dozens of flights and fraying everyone's nerves. The first-class passengers had already expressed their displeasure to the gate agents, the flight attendants, and anyone else within earshot. They were accustomed to schedules that bent to their will, not weather that refused to cooperate. Marcus had boarded through the priority lane after spending 72 hours straight in crisis meetings in Washington, D.C. 3 major airlines had reported critical safety violations involving faulty aircraft sensors, and as the newly appointed FAA Director, the responsibility for investigating and resolving the crisis had fallen squarely on his shoulders. He was the 3rd African American to ever hold the position, and he felt the weight of that history with every decision he made. He'd barely slept, barely eaten, and hadn't changed clothes in 2 days. All he wanted was to fly home to Miami for his daughter Zoe's graduation from medical school. After everything he'd been through to get to this position, missing his daughter's achievement wasn't an option. The gate agent who'd processed his boarding pass was Sofia Martinez, a Hispanic woman in her early 30s who worked double shifts to support her 2 children. She'd glanced at Marcus's casual attire with a moment's hesitation when she saw first class on his ticket, but her training kicked in. She'd seen enough wealthy tech entrepreneurs and venture capitalists dressed down to know that appearances could be deceiving. Seat 2A, Mr. Johnson. Thank you for your patience with the delay, Sophia had said with professional courtesy, though her smile carried genuine warmth. Marcus had nodded his thanks and made his way down the jet bridge, grateful for the prospect of a few hours of peace. The first-class cabin smelled of leather and expensive coffee, a stark contrast to the chaos of the terminal behind him. He'd settled into his window seat, pulled out his tablet, and tried to decompress from the most stressful week of his career. That's when Captain Victoria Blackwood had emerged from the cockpit. Victoria was the kind of woman who commanded attention the moment she entered a room. At 42, she was a 15-year veteran of commercial aviation and one of the most senior female captains at Atlantic Airways. She came from aviation royalty. Her grandfather had flown for TWA, her father for Pan Am, and she wore that legacy like armor. She'd fought tooth and nail for every promotion, enduring harassment, discrimination, and countless men who believed she didn't belong in the cockpit. The struggle had hardened her, twisted her sense of justice into something sharp and bitter. She'd earned her place through suffering, and in her mind, everyone else should have to do the same. The recent push for diversity in aviation had triggered something dark in Victoria. New FAA initiatives aimed at increasing minority representation in pilot training programs felt like an assault on the exclusivity she'd fought to join. She'd become the gatekeeper of her own pain, using her authority to enforce the same barriers that had once been used against her. Victoria's emerald eyes swept the first-class cabin with military precision. She prided herself on knowing her premium passengers, memorizing the names and faces of frequent flyers who generated significant revenue for the airline. She knew every detail about the businessman in 2B, Robert Henderson, whose corporate account brought in 6 figures annually. She recognized the young tech entrepreneur in 3A, Tyler Brooks, whose startup had recently gone public. Even the off-duty flight attendant, deadheading in 4A, Amy Rodriguez, was familiar. But the man in 2A was a stranger, and strangers in first class made Victoria suspicious. Marcus represented everything that threatened Victoria's vision of aviation. He was confident without arrogance, intelligent without condescension, and he occupied space that she believed he hadn't earned through the same suffering she'd endured. The fact that he looked comfortable, relaxed, and unbothered by her presence only intensified her irritation. "Sir, I asked you a question." Victoria continued, her voice carrying the authoritative projection she'd perfected over years of commanding flight crews. "I need to see your boarding pass." Marcus looked up from his tablet, his expression neutral but alert. He'd dealt with people like Victoria his entire life in the Air Force, in corporate boardrooms, in the halls of government. People who needed to establish dominance the moment they entered a room. Usually he'd de-escalate, show whatever documentation they demanded, and let them feel important for a few minutes. But today was different. Today he was exhausted from carrying the weight of aviation safety on his shoulders. Today he represented not just himself, but the integrity of the entire Federal Aviation Administration. And today he didn't feel like bowing down to someone else's prejudice. "My boarding pass was checked at the gate," Marcus said calmly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "And by your flight attendant. Is there a specific safety concern I can help address?" The question was perfectly reasonable, professionally phrased, and completely disarming. Victoria had expected deference, maybe even fear. Instead, she was being treated as a peer by someone she'd already decided was beneath her. "This isn't a negotiation," Victoria snapped, her red lips curling into a sneer. "I am the captain of this aircraft. I have the authority to remove any passenger I deem a security risk or disruption to the safety and comfort of our premium guests." Robert Henderson, the businessman in 2B, lowered his newspaper. He was a man in his 50s who'd spent his career in corporate finance, comfortable with hierarchies and authority structures. He'd witnessed this kind of exchange before, but had never felt compelled to intervene. The man in question seemed articulate and calm, but Victoria was the captain. Surely she knew what she was doing. Tyler Brooks, the tech entrepreneur, had been scrolling through his phone when the confrontation began. At 26, he'd built his fortune by recognizing patterns and disruptions before others did. Something about this interaction felt wrong, but he wasn't sure if he should get involved. He quietly activated his phone's video recording function just in case. Amy Rodriguez, the off-duty flight attendant, straightened in her seat. She'd worked in aviation for over a decade and had never seen a captain personally confront a passenger for simply existing in first class. Her training told her this was irregular but challenging. A captain's authority could end her career. The cabin had grown quiet, with conversation stopping and heads turning toward the confrontation. The storm outside continued to rage, but the real turbulence was building inside the aircraft. Marcus studied Victoria's face, reading the anger and determination in her eyes. He recognized the signs of someone who'd been given a little power and intended to use all of it. He also recognized the particular kind of bias that saw his presence as an automatic threat, his comfort as evidence of deception. "Captain, I'm going to give you one opportunity to walk away from this," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a gravity that seemed to drop the temperature in the cabin. "You're making assumptions that are going to cost you everything you've worked for." Victoria's laugh was sharp and brittle. Are you threatening me? Because that's exactly the kind of behavior I'd expect from someone trying to scam their way into first class." She turned to address the cabin, her voice loud enough for every passenger to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. We're dealing with a passenger who appears to have fraudulently obtained a first-class boarding pass. For your safety and comfort, we're going to resolve this situation before departure." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong, every qualified individual who'd been dismissed because of their appearance every moment when prejudice had been disguised as policy. Marcus Johnson had spent his entire career preparing for moments like this. As a young lieutenant in the Air Force, he'd been denied entry to an officers' club by a colonel who assumed he was enlisted personnel. As a consultant, he'd been mistaken for security at corporate meetings. As a government official, he'd been questioned about his credentials more times than he could count. But he'd never been in a position to so definitively prove someone wrong. Captain Blackwood Marcus said, standing slowly from his seat. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "I'm going to ask you one more time to reconsider your approach. You're creating a situation that's going to have consequences far beyond this flight." Victoria's eyes blazed with triumph. She had him standing defensive exactly where she wanted him. "The only consequence here is you finding your correct seat. Security can escort you if necessary." Behind them, Tyler's live stream had automatically activated broadcasting the confrontation to his 50,000 followers. Comments began flooding in, most expressing outrage at what they were witnessing. Amy Rodriguez had begun recording as well, her professional instincts telling her this needed to be documented. Sofia Martinez, watching from the galley, felt her hands shake as she recognized the situation unfolding. She'd seen Captain Blackwood interact with other passengers who didn't fit the first-class stereotype, but never with such open hostility. She wanted to speak up, but challenging a captain could cost her the job she desperately needed. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the cabin windows as thunder rolled across the airport. Inside Flight 447, two forces were about to collide with the power to change everything. Victoria reached for her radio, prepared to call airport security and have Marcus removed. She was confident in her authority, certain of her righteousness, and completely unaware that she was about to make the worst mistake of her professional life. Marcus watched her reach for the radio and made a decision that would reverb through the aviation industry for years to come. He reached into his wallet and withdrew a leather credential case that gleamed under the cabin lights. The leather credential case felt heavy in Marcus's hands, weighted with the responsibility and authority it represented. But as he looked at Victoria's determined face, his mind drifted back 30 years to another moment when someone had questioned whether he belonged. It was 1995, and Second Lieutenant Marcus Johnson was 23 years old, fresh out of the Air Force Academy, and assigned to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. He'd been invited to a mandatory briefing at the Officers' Club, his first official function as a commissioned officer. He'd worn his dress uniform with pride, his lieutenant's bars polished to perfection. The club entrance was grand, all brass and mahogany, designed to impress visiting dignitaries and remind junior officers of the institution they served. Marcus had approached the front door with confidence, his invitation in hand, ready to take his place among his fellow officers. Colonel Bradley Hutchinson, a 30-year veteran with silver hair and cold blue eyes, had been standing near the entrance, greeting arrivals. When he saw Marcus approaching, his expression shifted from professional courtesy to suspicious authority. "Excuse me, son," Colonel Hutchinson had said, stepping directly into Marcus's path. "The help enters through the back. Kitchen staff should use the service entrance." Marcus had stopped the words, hitting him like a physical blow. "Sir, I'm Second Lieutenant Johnson. I'm here for the logistics briefing." The colonel's eyes had narrowed, scanning Marcus's uniform with the kind of scrutiny reserved for hunting down uniform violations. "Lieutenant, where's your ID?" Son Marcus had produced his military identification, his orders, and his invitation to the briefing. Colonel Hutchinson had examined each document with deliberate slowness, his silence stretching uncomfortably as other officers walked past them into the club. "Well, I'll be damned," the colonel had finally muttered, handing back Marcus's credentials. "Guess they're letting all kinds in these days." No apology, no acknowledgement of the mistake. Just a grudging acceptance that Marcus had the paperwork to justify his presence. That night, lying in his barracks bunk, Marcus had made a promise to himself. He would never again be in a position where someone could question his right to be somewhere. He would earn credentials so unquestionable, achieve positions so unassailable, that no one would ever again mistake him for anything less than what he was. The promise had driven every decision in his career. Military logistics became his specialty, where precision and competence couldn't be questioned. He'd completed 2 tours in Iraq, managing supply chains that kept coalition forces operational. His efficiency reports were flawless, his promotions ahead of schedule. After leaving the military, Marcus had used his GI benefits to earn a graduate degree from MIT focusing on operations management and airline logistics. He'd worked as a consultant for major airlines, identifying inefficiencies and implementing solutions that saved millions of dollars. Every achievement was armor against doubt. Every promotion was proof of belonging. Every success was a quiet response to everyone who'd ever questioned his presence. When the FAA directorship opened up, Marcus had been the obvious choice. His combination of military experience, academic credentials, and industry knowledge was unmatched. The Senate confirmation had been unanimous, a rare achievement in the polarized political climate. But success hadn't insulated him from moments like this one. The higher he climbed, the more scrutiny he faced, the more his qualifications were questioned. Being the third African American to hold his position meant carrying the weight of representation along with the responsibility of leadership. Victoria Blackwood had her own history of fighting for recognition, though her path had taken a darker turn. Born into aviation aristocracy, she'd grown up surrounded by pilots who spoke of flying as a calling, a noble profession reserved for the exceptional few. Her grandfather, Captain William Blackwood, had flown DC-3s for Transworld Airlines in the golden age of aviation. Her father, Captain Richard Blackwood, had commanded Boeing 747s for Pan American World Airways before the airline's collapse. Aviation wasn't just her profession, it was her birthright. But birthright meant nothing when she was the only woman in her ground school class at aviation college. It meant nothing when flight instructors told her that women lacked the physical strength for commercial aviation. It meant nothing when her first airline interviews ended with suggestions that she consider becoming a flight attendant instead. Victoria had fought for every rating, every certification, every promotion. She'd endured comments about her appearance, questions about her emotional stability, and assumptions about her competence. When she finally earned her captain's stripes at Atlantic Airways, it felt like vindication for every slight, every doubt, every barrier she'd overcome. The struggle had changed her. What started as determination had curdled into resentment. The exclusivity she'd fought to join became something she felt compelled to protect. If she'd suffered to earn her place, then suffering should be the price of admission for everyone else. The recent FAA initiatives promoting diversity in pilot training had triggered Victoria's deepest fears. Programs designed to increase minority representation in aviation felt like threats to the meritocracy she believed she represented. In her mind, lowering barriers for others somehow diminished her own achievements. She'd become a guardian of gatekeeping, using her authority to enforce standards she believed were under attack. Passengers who didn't look like traditional first-class travelers became suspects. Crew members who challenged her authority faced retribution. The power she'd fought to achieve had become a weapon against others seeking the same opportunities. As Victoria reached for her radio to call security, her mind was already constructing the narrative. An economy passenger had somehow obtained a fraudulent first-class boarding pass. She was protecting the airline's premium service and maintaining the standards that separated elite travelers from the masses. Security to Gate A7. Victoria spoke into her radio, her voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "We have a passenger situation requiring immediate assistance." Tyler Brooks, still recording on his phone, watched the scene unfold with growing alarm. His live stream audience had swelled to over 75,000 viewers as word spread across social media. The chat was exploding with comments most expressing outrage at what appeared to be blatant discrimination. "This is insane," Tyler whispered into his phone, careful to keep his voice low. "A pilot is literally calling security on a passenger for sitting in first class. This is 2024, people. How is this still happening?" Amy Rodriguez felt her professional training at war with her conscience. As an off-duty flight attendant, she understood the chain of command that governed aircraft operations. Captains had ultimate authority, and challenging that authority was career suicide. But she'd never witnessed such an obvious abuse of power. Robert Henderson, the businessman in 2B, finally set aside his newspaper. His corporate experience had taught him to recognize power dynamics, and something about this situation felt fundamentally wrong. The passenger in question was articulate, calm, and clearly educated. The captain's hostility seemed disproportionate to any actual threat. Sophia Martinez watched from the galley, her hands trembling as she organized water bottles that were already perfectly arranged. She'd processed Marcus's boarding pass herself, verified his identification, and confirmed his seat assignment. There was no fraud, no mistake, no irregularity. This was purely about appearance and assumption. Captain Blackwood Sophia finally found her voice, stepping forward with documents in hand. "I processed Mr. Johnson's boarding pass personally. His ticket is valid, his identification checked out, and there were no red flags in the reservation system." Victoria turned on Sophia with laser focus. "Did I ask for your input?" "Martinez, return to your station and let security handle this situation." The dismissal was sharp and public, designed to humiliate Sophia back into silence. But Marcus noticed the gate agent's attempt to help, and it reminded him that this confrontation would affect more people than just himself. David Miller, the co-pilot, emerged from the cockpit to investigate the delay. At 28, he was new to commercial aviation, but experienced enough to recognize when situations were escalating beyond normal parameters. He'd flown with Victoria before and knew her reputation for being difficult, but he'd never seen her personally confront a passenger. "Captain, is there a problem with departure?" David asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Passenger issue, Miller. Nothing that concerns you. Get back to your pre-flight checks." David hesitated. The passenger in question seemed calm and reasonable, nothing like the disruptive travelers who usually warranted captain intervention. But challenging Victoria's judgment would mark him as insubordinate, potentially ending his career before it had properly begun. The cabin had fallen completely silent except for the storm raging outside. Lightning illuminated the windows as thunder rolled across the airport nature, providing a dramatic backdrop to the human conflict unfolding inside Flight 447. Marcus stood in the aisle, his credential case still in his hand, watching Victoria's face as she spoke with airport security. He could end this confrontation immediately by revealing his identity, but something held him back. He wanted to see how far this would go, how deep the prejudice ran, how many people would stand by and watch injustice unfold. The decision would cost Victoria everything, but it would also reveal something important about the system they both served. Every witness in this cabin would remember what they saw, how they felt, and whether they chose to act when action was needed. "Security is on their way," Victoria announced to the cabin, her voice carrying satisfaction and certainty. "We'll have this resolved shortly and can proceed with departure." Marcus looked around the cabin, making eye contact with each passenger and crew member. Tyler, still filming, gave him a subtle nod of support. Amy Rodriguez looked torn between professional loyalty and personal conscience. Robert Henderson appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Sophia Martinez stood frozen by the galley papers, clutched in her shaking hands. Captain Blackwood Marcus said finally, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, You have exactly one opportunity to apologize and walk away from this situation. Think very carefully about your next move." Victoria's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Apologize to you for doing my job and protecting my passengers from fraud." She turned to address the cabin again, playing to her audience of premium travelers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been flying for 15 years and I know scam artists when I see them. This man is clearly not a legitimate first-class passenger." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Marcus felt the weight of every similar moment in his life. Every assumption, every challenge, every time someone had decided he didn't belong based solely on his appearance. But this time was different. This time he held the power to prove definitively that assumptions could be catastrophically wrong. Thunder crashed outside the aircraft, and Marcus Johnson, Director of the Federal Aviation Administration, made his decision. "Show me your boarding pass right now, or security will remove you from my aircraft," Victoria demanded, her voice echoing through the cabin with the authority of absolute certainty. She stood with her hands on her hips, her perfectly styled appearance a stark contrast to Marcus's casual attire. Her emerald eyes blazed with righteous indignation, convinced she was protecting the integrity of first-class service. Marcus remained standing in the aisle, his credential case still closed in his hand. He looked directly into Victoria's eyes, his expression calm but resolute. "Captain, you're making a serious mistake. I'm giving you one final opportunity to reconsider your actions. The only mistake here," Victoria shot back, "is allowing someone like you to think you can intimidate your way into seats you can't afford. I've seen every scam in the book, and your performance isn't fooling anyone." Tyler Brooks's phone trembled slightly as he held it steady, his live stream now reaching over 100,000 viewers. The chat was moving so fast he couldn't read individual comments, but the outrage was palpable. "This is absolutely incredible," he whispered into his phone. "We're witnessing actual discrimination happening in real time on a commercial flight." Amy Rodriguez finally couldn't remain silent. Standing up from her seat in 4A, she addressed Victoria with the professional courtesy that had been ingrained in her through years of flight training. "Captain, I'm deadheading on this flight, and I have to say this passenger has been nothing but cooperative. Perhaps we could resolve this more quietly." Victoria's head snapped toward Amy, her expression venomous. "Did I ask for input from deadhead crew? Your airline doesn't even partner with us anymore, so your opinions about my aircraft are unwelcome. Sit down and mind your own business, or I'll have you removed as well." The threat was clear and public, designed to silence Amy and warn others against intervention. Amy felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she also felt something else rising in her chest. Anger at watching abuse of authority disguised as safety protocol. "Captain Blackwood," Amy said, remaining standing, despite the threat threatening to remove crew members for expressing safety concerns could constitute a violation of federal aviation regulations. "I'd be careful about making statements like that with this many witnesses present." Victoria's face flushed red beneath her perfectly applied makeup. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she considered subordinate. "Are you questioning my authority on my own aircraft? Because that's exactly the kind of insubordination I'd expect from airlines that hire based on quotas rather than qualifications." The comment hung in the air like poison, its implications clear to everyone in the cabin. Amy was Hispanic, and Victoria's reference to quotas wasn't subtle. The mask of professionalism was slipping, revealing the prejudice underneath. Robert Henderson had been watching the confrontation with growing discomfort. As a successful businessman, he understood power dynamics and recognized when they were being abused. The passenger in 2A had done nothing wrong that he could see, yet was being treated like a criminal. The captain's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic and frankly embarrassing. "Excuse me," Captain Robert said, standing up from 2B. "I've been flying first class for 20 years, and I've never seen a paying passenger treated this way. Perhaps we could see the actual problem with his ticket instead of these accusations." Victoria turned her blazing attention to Robert, but her tone shifted slightly. He was exactly the kind of passenger she was supposed to protect, wealthy white, and wielding the kind of corporate influence that could affect her career. Mr. Henderson, I appreciate your concern for service standards. That's exactly why we're addressing this fraudulent situation. Once we remove this individual, we can provide you with the premium experience you deserve. But Robert surprised her. Instead of accepting her explanation, he pressed further. I'm not seeing any fraud here. I'm seeing a paying passenger being harassed for sitting in his assigned seat. This is discrimination, plain and simple. The word discrimination hit Victoria like a slap. She prided herself on being a professional, someone who made decisions based on safety and protocol, not bias. Having a premium passenger call her behavior what it actually was threatened her entire self-image. Mr. Henderson. Victoria said, her voice tight with controlled rage. I don't think you understand the complexities of aviation security. There are protocols for identifying potential threats, and this individual fits several risk profiles. Marcus had been listening to the exchange with growing amazement. Victoria was now openly discussing risk profiles in front of a cabin full of witnesses, essentially admitting to racial profiling. The legal implications were staggering, but he let her continue digging her grave deeper. What risk profiles? Tyler called out from 3A, still recording, looking comfortable in first class, reading quietly on a tablet, breathing while Black Tyler's directness sent shock waves through the cabin. He'd said what everyone was thinking, but afraid to voice. The live stream chat exploded with fire emojis and applause as viewers recognized the courage it took to speak truth to power. Victoria's composure finally cracked. That's it. I will not tolerate passengers disrupting my cabin with inflammatory accusations. Security will remove anyone who continues to interfere with my authority. She grabbed her radio again, this time speaking louder for the entire cabin to hear. Security to Gate A7 priority response. Multiple passengers are creating a disturbance and refusing to comply with crew instructions. We need immediate assistance to restore order. Sophia Martinez watched from the galley, horrified by how the situation was spiraling. She pulled out her own phone and began recording, knowing that someone needed to document Victoria's behavior from a crew perspective. As a gate agent, she'd seen difficult passengers, but this was something entirely different. Captain Sophia said, her voice shaking but determined. I've been working for Atlantic Airways for 8 years, and Mr. Johnson's ticket is completely legitimate. I verified everything myself. There's no fraud here. Victoria whirled on Sophia with fury that seemed disproportionate to the comment. Martinez, you're a gate agent, not security personnel. Your job is to scan tickets, not make security assessments. If I discover you've been negligent in your verification procedures, it will be reflected in your employment record. The threat was clear support Victoria's narrative or face retaliation. Sophia felt her job hanging in the balance, but she also knew she was watching something fundamentally wrong unfold. Her 2 children depended on her income, but they also deserved a mother who stood up for what was right. Captain, I'm willing to testify under oath that Mr. Johnson's documentation was completely in order. Sophia said, her voice growing stronger. His reservation showed full fare first class, his identification matched perfectly, and there were no red flags whatsoever in the booking system. David Miller, the co-pilot, emerged from the cockpit again, this time looking seriously concerned. The delay was now affecting their departure slot, and air traffic control was asking for updates. More importantly, he could hear the confrontation from the cockpit, and Victoria's behavior was becoming impossible to ignore. Captain, we're facing a significant delay, and ATC is requesting our status. Should I inform them we're dealing with a security issue? Victoria saw an opportunity to solidify her narrative. Yes, Miller. Inform ATC that we have multiple uncooperative passengers and are waiting for security assistance before we can safely depart. David hesitated. Reporting a security issue would trigger official protocols, involve federal authorities, and create a paper trail that would be difficult to explain if the situation was resolved differently. Captain, Are you certain this rises to the level of an official security report? Are you questioning my judgment? Co-pilot Miller. Victoria's voice carried a dangerous edge. Because I'm beginning to wonder if this crew understands the chain of command on my aircraft. The threat was implicit but clear support her version of events or face career consequences. David felt trapped between his training, which emphasized crew resource management and open communication, and his need to maintain his position as a junior pilot. Marcus watched the interaction with professional interest. Victoria was now threatening multiple crew members, creating a hostile work environment and using her authority to suppress dissent. Each threat, each statement, each action was another violation that would be documented and investigated. Amy Rodriguez made a decision that would change her career forever. Standing up again from 4A, she addressed the entire cabin in her clear, trained flight attendant voice. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Amy Rodriguez, and I'm an off-duty flight attendant with 12 years of experience in commercial aviation. What you're witnessing is not normal protocol. Passengers are not removed from aircraft for sitting quietly in their assigned seats. This is discrimination, and it's wrong. The cabin erupted. Tyler's live stream audience cheered as comments flooded in supporting Amy's courage. Robert Henderson began applauding, followed by several other passengers who had been silently uncomfortable with Victoria's behavior. Victoria's face went pale beneath her makeup, then flushed deep red. An industry professional had just publicly called her actions discrimination in front of a cabin full of witnesses and cameras. The accusation couldn't be ignored or deflected. Ms. Rodriguez-Victoria said, her voice dangerously quiet. You've just interfered with flight operations and undermined the authority of the captain. I'm officially reporting you to your airline's management for unprofessional conduct. Amy smiled grimly. Captain, my airline actually has policies against discrimination. They'll be very interested to see the video evidence of this situation. I think my management will support crew members who speak up against injustice. Tyler held his phone higher, making sure he captured Victoria's reaction. This is insane, people, he said to his live stream audience. She's now threatening a flight attendant for standing up against discrimination. How deep does this go? Marcus finally stepped forward, closing the space between himself and Victoria. His movement was deliberate and calm, but there was something in his posture that commanded attention. The conversations in the cabin died down as passengers sensed something significant was about to happen. Captain Blackwood Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire cabin. You've now threatened passengers, crew members, and a gate agent. You've made false reports to security and air traffic control. You've engaged in profiling based on race and appearance, and you've created a hostile environment that violates multiple federal regulations. Victoria stared at him, momentarily speechless. There was something different in his voice now, a weight of authority that hadn't been there before. You have exactly 30 seconds to apologize to everyone in this cabin and end this farce, Marcus continued, or I'm going to show you exactly how much power you actually have on this aircraft. Victoria's lip curled in contempt. Power. You think you have power here? I am the captain of this aircraft. I decide who stays and who goes. And you, she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at his chest. You are going to be removed from my plane in handcuffs. She grabbed her radio one final time, her voice carrying absolute certainty. Security to Gate A7, immediate response required. We have a passenger making threats against the flight crew. I want this individual arrested for interference with flight operations. The entire cabin held its breath. Tyler's phone captured every word, every gesture, every moment of what was about to become the most viral aviation incident in social media history. Amy Rodriguez stood ready to testify to what she'd witnessed. Robert Henderson pulled out his own phone to document the resolution. Sophia Martinez's hands shook as she recorded from the galley. Marcus looked around the cabin one final time, making eye contact with each person who had shown courage in standing up for what was right. Then he looked directly into Victoria's blazing emerald eyes. "Captain Blackwood," he said quietly, "you just made the worst mistake of your professional life." Thunder crashed outside the aircraft as Marcus Johnson, director of the Federal Aviation Administration, reached for his credential case and prepared to change everything. Tyler Brooks's hands were steady now, his phone capturing every detail as the confrontation reached its peak. His live stream had exploded to over 200,000 viewers, with shares multiplying across every social platform. The chat was moving so fast it was just a blur of outrage, support, and disbelief. "Okay, people, this is it," Tyler whispered into his phone, his voice tight with anticipation. "She just called security to have this man arrested for literally sitting in his seat. I cannot believe what we're witnessing here." From her position in 4A, Amy Rodriguez held her own phone with professional stability, using techniques she'd learned during safety training to document incidents. Her 12 years of flight experience told her this was unprecedented. She'd seen difficult passengers, medical emergencies, and weather delays, but never a captain engaged in such obvious discrimination against a cooperative traveler. "I'm Amy Rodriguez," she said clearly into her camera flight attendant with Silver Sky Airlines employee number 47291. "It's currently 7:23 p.m. on October 15th aboard Atlantic Airways Flight 447 at Chicago O'Hare. I'm recording what appears to be racially motivated discrimination by Captain Victoria Blackwood against passenger Marcus Johnson in Seat 2A. Her training kicked in as she documented the facts without editorial comment, creating a record that could be used in investigations, legal proceedings, or regulatory hearings. Every detail mattered: the time, the location, the names, the specific actions taken. Robert Henderson, the businessman in 2B, activated his phone's recording function while keeping it low and discreet. His corporate experience had taught him the value of documentation when witnessing potential liability situations. As someone who'd sat in boardrooms where million-dollar lawsuits were discussed, he recognized when a company was about to face serious legal exposure. "This is Robert Henderson," he said quietly into his phone, documenting what appears to be discriminatory treatment of a first-class passenger by Atlantic Airways Captain Victoria Blackwood. The passenger in question has been cooperative and calm throughout the entire incident. From the galley, Sophia Martinez's hands trembled as she held her phone, but her voice was clear and determined. As the gate agent who had processed Marcus's boarding pass, her testimony would be crucial in any investigation. "My name is Sophia Martinez, Atlantic Airways Gate Agent, Employee ID 8847. I personally verified Mr. Johnson's reservation identification and boarding pass. Everything was completely legitimate. There was no fraud, no irregularities, nothing that would justify this treatment." Even other passengers who hadn't been directly involved began pulling out their phones. The businessman in 3B, the elderly couple in row 5, the woman traveling alone in 6A, suddenly everyone was documenting, creating multiple angles and perspectives of the same incident. Victoria noticed the phones appearing throughout the cabin, and panic began to creep into her voice. "Put those devices away immediately. Recording without consent on aircraft is a violation of federal regulations." Tyler looked up from his live stream, his young face set with determination. "Actually, Captain, we're in a public space, and you're a government-regulated airline employee engaging in what appears to be discriminatory conduct. We have every right to document this." The legal accuracy of his statement surprised even Tyler himself, but months of dealing with content creation and social media had given him a crash course in recording rights. His audience was now approaching 250,000 viewers, with major news outlets beginning to monitor the stream. Amy Rodriguez stood up again, this time addressing Victoria with the full authority of her professional experience. "Captain threatening passengers for documenting potential civil rights violations actually violates several FAA regulations regarding passenger rights and crew conduct." Victoria's carefully constructed authority was crumbling as multiple people challenged her simultaneously. She'd expected deference from crew members, compliance from passengers, and support from witnesses. Instead, she faced a cabin full of people armed with cameras and legal knowledge. "I am ordering everyone to stop recording and return to your seats," Victoria shouted, her professional composure completely shattered. "This is my aircraft, and I decide what happens here." Marcus watched the meltdown with amazement. Victoria was now making threats that would be captured on multiple devices, creating evidence that could be used in criminal proceedings, civil lawsuits, and regulatory investigations. Tyler's live stream chat exploded as viewers shared the stream across every platform imaginable: TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. The incident was spreading faster than any algorithm could track. Hashtags like Flight Discrimination, Atlantic, Airways, Scandal, and Captain Victoria began trending worldwide. "This is going viral in real time, people," Tyler announced to his audience. "We've got proof of everything. Multiple angles, multiple witnesses, and it's all being documented. This captain has no idea what she's done." David Miller, the co-pilot, watched the situation spiral from the cockpit doorway. His training emphasized the importance of crew resource management, which included speaking up when safety or regulations were being violated. Victoria's behavior was clearly outside normal parameters, but challenging her could end his career. Finally, professional integrity overcame personal fear. Captain David said, stepping into the cabin, "I think we need to de-escalate this situation. We're creating multiple regulatory violations, and this is all being recorded by passengers." Victoria turned on him with fury. "Miller, get back to your station immediately, or I'll write you up for insubordination. You don't question my decisions in front of passengers." David's face hardened. He'd tried to support Victoria professionally, but watching her threaten passengers, crew members, and now him for doing his job was too much. "Captain, I'm officially logging a concern about crew conduct in the flight record." The statement was significant. Co-pilots rarely challenged captains publicly, and officially logging concerns triggered automatic reviews by airline management and potentially federal investigators. Amy Rodriguez smiled grimly as she heard David's statement. "That's proper crew resource management," she said, speaking both to her camera and the cabin. "When safety and regulations are being violated, crew members are required to speak up regardless of hierarchy." Tyler's live stream audience was now receiving updates from major news organizations. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and dozens of aviation blogs were monitoring the stream, preparing to break the story the moment it resolved. The incident was becoming a national conversation before it had even ended. "People, this is bigger than just one discriminatory captain," Tyler said to his phone. "This is about every person who's ever been told they don't belong somewhere because of how they look. We're witnessing history here." Sophia Martinez felt her phone buzzing with notifications as the videos she'd shared began circulating among Atlantic Airways employees. Other gate agents, flight attendants, and ground crew were sharing their own stories about Victoria's behavior, creating a pattern of conduct that would be impossible for the airline to ignore. Robert Henderson was already calculating the financial implications for Atlantic Airways. Stock prices would plummet when markets opened. Legal settlements would reach into millions. Regulatory fines could exceed the airline's quarterly profits. He'd seen companies destroyed by viral videos showing employee misconduct. Victoria's radio crackled to life as airport security responded to her repeated calls. "Security to Captain Blackwood, we're approaching Gate A7. Can you provide details on the nature of the passenger disturbance?" Marcus smiled quietly as he heard the radio transmission. Security was about to witness the resolution of this incident, adding official observers to the growing list of people who would testify about Victoria's conduct. "This is it," Amy Rodriguez said into her camera. "Security is arriving, and this situation is about to be resolved one way or another. What we've documented here today will change aviation industry policies around discrimination and crew conduct." Tyler held his phone steady as footsteps approached down the jet bridge. His live stream audience was now over 300,000 people, all watching to see how this incredible confrontation would end. Victoria straightened her uniform and prepared to greet security with the confidence of someone certain she was about to be vindicated. She had no idea that her next words would be preserved forever, shared millions of times, and studied in business schools as an example of how prejudice could destroy careers in the digital age. Marcus looked around the cabin one final time, taking in the faces of everyone who had found the courage to stand up for what was right. Tyler documenting everything with fearless determination. Amy risking her career to speak truth to power. Robert using his privilege to support justice. Sophia overcoming fear to defend what was right. Even David finally finding the courage to challenge authority when it mattered most. They had all chosen to be witnesses rather than bystanders, activists rather than observers. Their courage would be remembered long after this flight was forgotten. Thunder rumbled outside as security footsteps echoed down the jet bridge, and Marcus Johnson prepared to reveal exactly who Victoria Blackwood had chosen to discriminate against. The footsteps grew louder as airport security approached the aircraft. Victoria Blackwood smoothed her uniform one final time, her emerald eyes bright with vindication. She'd called security 3 times, filed reports about an uncooperative passenger, and documented what she believed was a fraudulent boarding situation. In her mind, she was about to be proven right in front of a cabin full of witnesses. "Security is here," she announced to the passengers, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone certain they were about to be vindicated. "We'll have this resolved immediately, and then we can provide you with the premium service you deserve." Tyler Brooks held his phone steady, his live stream audience now exceeding 350,000 viewers. Comments were flooding in faster than anyone could read, but the energy was palpable. Something big was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. "This is the moment," Tyler whispered into his camera. "Security is about to board, and this man hasn't shown any identification yet. But look at his face. He's not worried. He's not nervous. He's calm in a way that suggests he's holding all the cards." Marcus Johnson stood in the aisle beside his seat, still holding the leather credential case that could end this confrontation instantly. But he'd learned something important by letting Victoria reveal her true nature. This wasn't just about one discriminatory captain. This was about a culture that allowed such behavior to flourish, protected by hierarchy and enabled by silence. 2 airport security officers appeared in the first-class cabin doorway. Officer James Patterson, a 20-year veteran of airport security, and Officer Maria Santos, a former Chicago police detective who'd transitioned to airport work. Both were experienced in dealing with passenger disputes, but the tension in this cabin felt different. Captain Blackwood, Officer Patterson said, his voice professional but curious. "We received reports of a passenger disturbance and possible fraudulent documentation." Victoria stepped forward with theatrical confidence. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly. This individual," she pointed directly at Marcus, "has fraudulently obtained a first-class boarding pass and is refusing to provide proper identification. He's been belligerent, threatening, and has disrupted the entire cabin." Officer Santos looked around the first-class section, taking in the scene. The cabin was filled with passengers holding phones, documenting everything. The accused passenger stood calmly in the aisle, showing none of the agitation or hostility typically associated with disruptive travelers. Multiple crew members appeared uncomfortable, which was unusual when captains were dealing with legitimate problems. Sir Officer Patterson addressed Marcus. "We'd like to resolve this situation quickly and get this flight departed. Can you please provide your boarding pass and identification?" Marcus looked directly at Victoria, giving her one final opportunity to reconsider. "Captain Blackwood, are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with these accusations? Once this process begins, there's no going back." Victoria's laugh was sharp with triumph. "Officers, this is exactly the kind of intimidation tactics I've been dealing with. He's trying to manipulate the situation rather than simply providing the documentation you've requested." Amy Rodriguez held her phone steady from 4A, her flight attendant training helping her capture clear audio of every exchange. She'd witnessed passenger disputes before, but something about Marcus's demeanor suggested this was about to take an unexpected turn. "Officers," Amy called out, "I'm an off-duty flight attendant, and I need you to know that this passenger has been completely cooperative throughout this incident. He's shown no signs of agitation or hostility. The only disruption has come from Captain Blackwood's behavior." Officer Santos turned toward Amy with interest. Professional crew members rarely spoke against captains, unless something significant was wrong. "Can you elaborate on that, ma'am?" Before Amy could respond, Victoria interjected with authority. "Officers, this woman is not part of our crew and has been interfering with my authority throughout this incident. I suggest you focus on the actual problem rather than listening to outside agitators." Tyler's livestream chat exploded as viewers recognized the dismissive language Victoria was using. Terms like agitators and outside interference had historical connotations that his audience immediately understood. Sofia Martinez stepped forward from the galley, her hands no longer shaking. "Officers, I'm Sofia Martinez, the gate agent who processed Mr. Johnson's boarding pass. His documentation was completely legitimate. There was no fraud, no irregularities, nothing that would justify this treatment." Officer Patterson looked confused. If the gate agent confirmed legitimate documentation, why was the captain claiming fraud? "Ma'am, you're saying his ticket and ID were valid when you processed them?" "Completely valid," Sophia confirmed. "Full fare first-class identification matched perfectly, and the reservation showed no red flags whatsoever." Victoria's face began to flush as her narrative crumbled. "Martinez is a junior employee who may have missed security indicators. As captain, I'm trained to recognize threats that gate agents might overlook." Robert Henderson couldn't remain silent any longer. Standing from 2B, he addressed the officers with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Officers, I'm Robert Henderson, and I've been watching this entire incident. This passenger has done absolutely nothing wrong. He's been calm, respectful, and cooperative. The captain's behavior, however, has been unprofessional and, frankly, discriminatory." Officer Santos was beginning to see a pattern. Multiple witnesses were supporting the passenger and criticizing the captain. Crew members appeared uncomfortable. The passenger himself remained remarkably calm for someone supposedly engaging in fraudulent activity. Sir Officer Santos addressed Marcus directly. "This situation appears to involve some conflicting accounts. Would you mind showing us your boarding pass and identification so we can resolve this quickly?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Officer Santos, I'd be happy to provide identification, but I want everyone in this cabin to understand something first." He looked around at each face, making eye contact with every person who had shown courage during this confrontation. "What you've witnessed here today represents something much larger than one incident on one flight. You've seen how prejudice operates, how it disguises itself as policy, and how it relies on silence and compliance to survive." Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically. "Officers, this is more of the same manipulation. Can we please just see his documents and remove him from the aircraft?" Marcus opened his leather credential case slowly, deliberately allowing the suspense to build. Tyler's live-stream audience was on the edge of their seats. Amy Rodriguez held her breath. Robert Henderson leaned forward in anticipation. The first thing visible was a brass badge that gleamed under the cabin lights. Not an airline badge, not a corporate ID, but something that carried the weight of federal authority. Marcus removed the credential wallet, fully opening it to reveal an identification card that made Officer Patterson's eyes go wide. Then Marcus spoke the words that would end Victoria Blackwood's career forever. "Officers, I'm Marcus Johnson, Director of the Federal Aviation Administration." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the storm outside seemed to pause as the weight of his words settled over the cabin. Tyler's phone captured every face, every reaction, every moment of the truth hitting home. Victoria's expression went through a remarkable transformation. First confusion as her mind struggled to process what she'd heard. then recognition as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Finally, horror as the full implications of her actions crashed over her like a tsunami. Officer Santos was the first to recover from the shock. "Sir, could we see that identification?" Please. Marcus handed over his credentials with calm authority. Officer Patterson examined the ID carefully, noting the federal insignia, the official seals, and the photograph that clearly matched the man standing before them. "This appears to be legitimate federal identification," Officer Patterson announced to the cabin, his voice carrying a new tone of respect and concern. Tyler's live stream exploded as viewers realized what they'd just witnessed. The chat moved so fast it was just a blur of shocked emojis and exclamation points. "Holy Mother of God," Tyler whispered into his phone. She just tried to remove the director of the FAA from a flight for being black in first class. This is the biggest story of the year. Amy Rodriguez felt vindicated in every cell of her body. Her professional instincts had been correct. This was wrong, and now everyone knew exactly how wrong. She continued recording, knowing this footage would be studied in aviation schools for decades to come. Robert Henderson shook his head in amazement. In 30 years of corporate life, he'd never witnessed such a spectacular professional suicide. Victoria had just destroyed her career in the most public way imaginable. Sofia Martinez felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that she'd been right to support Marcus' fear about what this would mean for her job at Atlantic Airways. She'd just witnessed her airline's biggest crisis unfold in real time. David Miller, the co-pilot, stepped fully into the cabin, his face pale with the realization of what his captain had done. As a junior pilot, he'd been caught between loyalty and conscience. But now there was no question about which side of history he was on. Victoria stood frozen in the aisle, her mind racing as she tried to calculate a way out of the disaster she'd created. But there was no escape from the dozens of cameras capturing every moment, no way to deny what hundreds of thousands of people had witnessed live. Director Johnson. Officer Santos said formally, "We sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. Is there anything we can do to assist you?" Marcus looked directly at Victoria, his expression calm but his words carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Captain Blackwood, you are in violation of federal anti-discrimination laws. You have created a hostile environment based on racial profiling, and you have abused your authority as pilot in command to target a passenger based solely on his appearance." Victoria's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Director Johnson, I didn't know. I was just—" "You were just what?" Captain Marcus's voice cut through her stammering. "Just doing your job. Just protecting first class. Just maintaining standards." Each phrase was a nail in Victoria's professional coffin, and everyone in the cabin knew it. Tyler held his phone higher to capture the confrontation. His audience was now approaching 400,000 viewers, and major news networks were monitoring his stream. This was no longer just a viral video, it was a national news event unfolding in real time. Marcus continued with devastating calm. "Captain, your behavior today represents everything wrong with institutionalized bias in the aviation industry. You've provided perfect examples of how prejudice operates, how it justifies itself, and how it damages both individuals and institutions." Victoria tried once more to salvage something from the wreckage. "Sir, I deeply apologize for any misunderstanding. If I could just—" "There was no misunderstanding," Marcus interrupted. "You saw a black man in first class and immediately assumed fraud. You ignored multiple crew members confirming my legitimate documentation. You threatened passengers and employees who tried to intervene. This wasn't a mistake, it was a choice." Officer Patterson was already on his radio reporting the situation to his supervisors. A discrimination complaint involving the FAA Director would trigger multiple investigations, federal oversight, and massive media attention. The cabin remained silent except for the storm outside and the quiet sound of phones recording history. Everyone present understood they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just the revelation of hidden power, but the exposure of hidden prejudice. Marcus looked around the cabin one final time, his expression resolute. What happens next will determine whether this industry learns from this moment or repeats these mistakes. Thunder crashed outside as Flight 447 sat at the gate, its departure indefinitely delayed, while the biggest aviation discrimination scandal in decades began to unfold. The revelation hit the cabin like a shockwave, but Marcus Johnson wasn't finished. The director of the Federal Aviation Administration stood in the aisle of Flight 447, his credentials gleaming under the cabin lights, and began to dismantle not just Victoria Blackwood's career, but the culture that had enabled her behavior. Officer Santos Marcus said, his voice carrying the full weight of federal authority. "I'm formally filing a complaint of discrimination under federal civil rights laws. This incident represents a pattern of bias that extends beyond individual conduct to institutional failure." Tyler's live stream audience had exploded to over 450,000 viewers as news of the FAA Director's identity spread across social media. Major news networks were now cutting into regular programming to cover the story. FAA Director and Atlantic Airways scandal were trending worldwide. Victoria Blackwood stood frozen, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the pallor that had overtaken her face. Everything she'd worked for 15 years of flying, her captain's stripes, her reputation was crumbling in real time before hundreds of thousands of witnesses. "Director Johnson," she stammered, her voice barely audible, I sincerely apologize. If I could just explain my perspective." Marcus held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Captain Blackwood, your perspective has been made crystal clear to everyone in this cabin and everyone watching online. You believed that a black man couldn't legitimately afford first class. You ignored documentation from your own crew confirming my valid ticket. You threatened passengers and employees who tried to intervene. No explanation can justify that." Amy Rodriguez continued recording from 4A, her years of flight training helping her document every detail. This footage would become evidence in federal investigations, civil lawsuits, and congressional hearings. This is Amy Rodriguez documenting the formal complaint filed by FAA Director Marcus Johnson against Atlantic Airways Captain Victoria Blackwood for discrimination and civil rights violations. Robert Henderson was already calculating the catastrophic implications for Atlantic Airways. Stock prices would crash when markets opened. Legal settlements would reach tens of millions. Regulatory scrutiny would cost the airline hundreds of millions in compliance costs. He pulled out his own phone to call his financial advisors. Atlantic Airways stock was about to become worthless. Sophia Martinez felt vindicated, but also terrified. She'd stood up for what was right, but would Atlantic Airways retaliate against her for contradicting a captain? As a single mother, she couldn't afford to lose her job, but she also couldn't live with staying silent about injustice. Marcus seemed to read her concern. "Ms. Martinez," he said, addressing the gate agent directly, "your professionalism and courage in confirming the truth will be noted in my official report. No employee should face retaliation for providing accurate information about passenger documentation." The statement was both praise and protection, establishing a federal record that would shield Sophia from any potential company retaliation. David Miller, the co-pilot, stepped forward with obvious relief. "Director Johnson, I want to formally state for the record that I observed Captain Blackwood's behavior throughout this incident, and it violated multiple company policies and federal regulations regarding passenger treatment and crew conduct." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Mr. Miller, proper crew resource management includes speaking up when safety and regulations are compromised. Your willingness to put integrity above hierarchy will be noted." Tyler Brooks held his phone steady, providing live commentary to his massive audience. People were witnessing the real-time destruction of institutional racism in aviation. The FAA director is dismantling not just this captain's career, but the entire culture that made this possible. Victoria made one desperate attempt to salvage her career. Director Johnson. I've been flying for 15 years without any discrimination complaints. This was an isolated incident, a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Surely we can resolve this privately. Marcus's expression didn't change. Captain, this wasn't isolated. Multiple witnesses have documented a pattern of threatening behavior toward passengers and crew members. You created a hostile work environment, violated federal civil rights laws, and abused your authority as pilot in command. This requires public accountability, not private resolution. Officer Patterson was coordinating with multiple agencies as the situation escalated beyond airport security. The FBI would investigate civil rights violations. The Department of Transportation would launch a compliance review. Congressional oversight committees would demand hearings. Director Johnson. Officer Santos said formally, "What assistance do you need from airport security?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I want this aircraft grounded until Atlantic Airways completes a full review of Captain Blackwood's employment record and implements immediate corrective measures. No aircraft under her command should be allowed to operate until this investigation is complete." The words carried the force of federal law. As FAA Director, Marcus had the authority to ground aircraft, suspend licenses, and impose emergency safety measures. Victoria's career wasn't just over. Her ability to ever fly commercially again was now in question. Tyler's audience was approaching 500,000 viewers as the story went global. International news outlets were picking up the feed, translating the commentary into dozens of languages. This wasn't just American news, it was a worldwide conversation about discrimination and accountability. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number that sent chills through everyone who recognized its significance, the direct line to the Atlantic Airways CEO. "This is Marcus Johnson, Director of the Federal Aviation Administration," he said when the call connected. "I'm calling to inform you that I'm filing formal discrimination charges against Captain Victoria Blackwood and launching an immediate investigation into your airline's hiring, training, and oversight procedures." The conversation was brief and devastating. Atlantic Airways CEO Patricia Wells offered immediate cooperation, promised full investigation, and asked what the company could do to address the situation. Marcus's response was direct. "You can start by immediately suspending Captain Blackwood pending investigation and implementing emergency anti-discrimination training for all crew members." Victoria listened to her career being dismantled in real time. Suspension would trigger union investigations, which would reveal the pattern of complaints that had been buried by management. Emergency training would admit institutional failure, making civil lawsuits easier to pursue. Everything was falling apart with devastating efficiency. Amy Rodriguez seized the moment to address a larger issue. "Director Johnson, this incident highlights problems throughout the aviation industry. Flight crews need better training on unconscious bias, passenger rights, and proper complaint procedures." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Ms. Rodriguez, you're absolutely right. This incident will trigger industry-wide reforms. We're implementing new requirements for bias training, passenger advocate programs, and independent oversight of discrimination complaints." Tyler spoke directly to his live stream audience. "This is what accountability looks like, people. Not just individual consequences, but institutional change. The FAA Director is using this moment to transform the entire industry." Victoria made one final desperate plea. "Director Johnson, I have a family, a mortgage, 20 years until retirement. This incident will destroy everything I've worked for. Surely there's some way to resolve this without ending my career." Marcus looked at her with an expression that mixed disappointment with resolve. "Captain Blackwood, did you consider my family when you tried to have me arrested? Did you think about the impact on my daughter's graduation that I'm flying to attend? Did you consider the families of other passengers you've discriminated against during your career?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, each one highlighting the selfishness of Victoria's current concern. "Actions have consequences," Marcus continued. "You chose to abuse your authority, violate federal law, and humiliate a passenger based on race. Those choices have consequences that extend far beyond your personal concerns." Robert Henderson stood up from 2B, addressing Victoria directly. "Captain, I've been in business for 30 years, and I've never seen such a spectacular example of career self-destruction. You had every opportunity to de-escalate this situation, but you chose to double down on discrimination. You earned these consequences." Sophia Martinez found her voice again, emboldened by the support she'd received. "Captain Blackwood, I tried to tell you Mr. Johnson's documentation was valid. You threatened my job for telling the truth. You did this to yourself." David Miller added his perspective as Victoria's co-pilot. "Captain, I watched you threaten passengers, crew members, and gate agents. You created this situation by refusing to acknowledge when you were wrong." Tyler held his phone higher to capture Victoria's reaction to the chorus of condemnation. His audience was now witnessing not just individual accountability, but collective recognition of justice being served. Marcus addressed the entire cabin with the authority of his office. "What you've witnessed today represents both a failure and an opportunity. A failure of leadership training and oversight that allowed discriminatory behavior to flourish, but also an opportunity to demonstrate that prejudice has consequences, that courage is rewarded, and that institutions can change when people demand better." Victoria stood alone in the aisle, abandoned by her crew, condemned by passengers, and facing federal investigation. Her beautiful uniform, once a symbol of authority, now seemed like a costume she no longer had the right to wear. Officer Patterson received instructions through his earpiece and approached Marcus with formal respect. "Director Johnson Airport Administration requests your presence for an official statement. They're also asking how you'd like to proceed with the aircraft and passengers." Marcus considered the request. "Officer Patterson, I want this aircraft taken out of service for safety inspection. Captain Blackwood's emotional state makes her unfit for flight operations. Arrange alternative transportation for all passengers with full compensation for delays. The order would cost Atlantic Airways hundreds of thousands in immediate expenses, but it also demonstrated that discrimination had real financial consequences, not just legal ones." Tyler spoke to his massive online audience one final time from the aircraft. "People, we've just witnessed history. Not just because someone got caught discriminating, but because we saw what happens when people stand up for what's right. Everyone in this cabin, passengers, crew members, gate agents, found the courage to speak truth to power." As airport officials arrived to take statements, as federal agents prepared to launch investigations, as news crews assembled outside the terminal, Victoria Blackwood faced the complete destruction of everything she'd spent 15 years building. But more importantly, Marcus Johnson had transformed a moment of personal attack into a catalyst for institutional change that would benefit every traveler who might otherwise face discrimination. The storm outside was beginning to clear, but inside Flight 447 a different kind of storm was just beginning, one that would reshape the aviation industry and prove that justice, when properly applied, could be both swift and transformative. 3 hours later, Marcus Johnson walked through the arrivals gate at Miami International Airport, his worn leather bag slung over his shoulder and exhaustion finally showing in his eyes. The confrontation with Victoria Blackwood had ended with her being escorted off the aircraft by federal agents, but the emotional weight of the incident lingered with him. The terminal was buzzing with activity, but Marcus barely noticed the crowds. His mind was focused on one thing: finding his daughter Zoe, who would be waiting somewhere in this chaos, wearing her medical school graduation gown. Then he saw her. Dr. Zoe Johnson stood near the arrival board, her graduation cap slightly askew, her smile radiant even from across the crowded terminal. She held a homemade sign that read, "My Hero Dad," in the same handwriting she'd used for school projects since childhood. Marcus felt his composure finally crack. The calm authority that had carried him through the confrontation, the professional detachment that had helped him transform personal attack into institutional reform, all of it dissolved as he saw his daughter's face. Zoe spotted him at the same moment and ran toward him, her graduation gown flowing behind her like wings. They met in the middle of the terminal, embracing with the fierce intensity of family members who understood that some moments were worth every struggle that came before them. Dad Zoe whispered against his shoulder, "I saw the news. I saw what happened on that flight. I'm so proud of you." Marcus held his daughter tighter, finally allowing himself to feel the full emotional impact of what he'd experienced. "Baby girl, I almost missed your graduation because of someone's prejudice. But you know what I realized? Something important today. Fighting for what's right isn't just about changing laws or policies. It's about making sure your generation inherits a world where talent and character matter more than assumptions and bias." They walked out of the airport together, father and daughter, both understanding that this day had changed more than just Marcus's career or Zoe's academic achievement. It had changed their family's story from one of enduring discrimination to one of transforming it. The next morning, Marcus's phone buzzed with updates that would reshape the aviation industry for decades to come. Atlantic Airways had terminated Victoria Blackwood and launched a comprehensive review of all crew training programs. The Department of Transportation announced new federal requirements for bias training and passenger advocate programs. Congress scheduled hearings on discrimination in transportation. But the most meaningful notification wasn't about policy or investigations. It was a text message from Amy Rodriguez, the flight attendant who had risked her career to speak up for what was right. "Director Johnson, thank you for showing us that courage has consequences, the best kind." Marcus smiled as he read the message, then shared similar notes with Tyler Brooks, who had used his viral moment to launch a nonprofit organization documenting discrimination in travel. To Sophia Martinez, who had been promoted to supervisor after Atlantic Airways recognized her integrity. To Robert Henderson, who had transformed his corporate consulting practice to focus on bias elimination in business. Each person who had found courage in that first-class cabin had discovered that standing up for justice created ripples far beyond the moment itself. They had learned that witness could become advocacy, that documentation could become evidence, and that individual courage could spark institutional change. Victoria Blackwood's fall from grace became a cautionary tale taught in aviation schools worldwide. But the real lesson wasn't about the consequences of discrimination. It was about the power of ordinary people to choose justice over comfort, truth over silence, and courage over compliance. Marcus Johnson returned to his office as FAA Director with a renewed understanding of his role. He wasn't just regulating aircraft safety, he was ensuring that the skies belonged to everyone regardless of how they looked or where they came from. The incident on Flight 447 became known as the moment when aviation finally reckoned with its legacy of exclusion and chose a different future. And every time Marcus flew anywhere in the country, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in the everyday moments when ordinary people decide to do extraordinary things. True power. Marcus had learned wasn't about having authority over others. It was about using whatever influence you possessed to ensure that dignity, respect, and justice weren't privileges reserved for the fortunate few. They were rights guaranteed for everyone. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that every voice matters and every moment of courage can change the world, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button to help this message reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to our channel because stories like this matter, and we need to keep telling them until discrimination becomes a relic of the past, not a reality of the present. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that standing up for what's right isn't just about changing one situation. It's about changing everything that comes after. Comment below and tell us about a time you witnessed injustice or found the courage to speak up when others stayed silent. Your story matters, and it might inspire someone else to find their voice. Remember, change doesn't start with people in power positions like Marcus Johnson. It starts with ordinary people like Tyler, Amy, Sophia, Robert, and David. People who chose to do the right thing when it mattered most. People just like you. Thanks for watching, and remember, dignity isn't negotiable. Respect isn't optional, and justice isn't just a word. It's a choice we make every single day.